The silk sheets smelled like champagne and lies. I pressed my palm against my mouth, trying to muffle the nervous giggle threatening to escape as I wedged myself further under the massive king-sized bed. Dust tickled my nose. The floor was cold against my bare knees, and my off-shoulder wedding dress a ridiculous cloud of white tulle that cost more than 3 months of my salary as a nursing assistant bunched awkwardly around my thighs. This was supposed to be funny. A harmless prank to break the ice with Jake, the man I'd known for only 4 months before saying, "I do." I heard the door click open, but the footsteps that echoed across the marble entryway weren't Jake's shuffling, eager steps. These were heavy, deliberate, the footfalls of a man who owned every room he walked into. The scent hit me next. Not Jake's soapy detergent, but something darker, richer, bergamot, sandalwood, and the sharp metallic tang of danger. "You can come out now." My heart stopped. The voice was deep, rough like smoke over gravel. "Definitely not my husband. I can see your reflection in the window glass. Come out." It was not a suggestion. It was a warning. My palms grew cold even though the room was warm. I wanted to stay silent, to believe this was nothing more than an innocent misunderstanding. But then his voice came again, lower, sharper, like a blade brushing my throat. "I will count to 3. If you are still under there, I will consider you a threat." Fear wrapped around me so quickly I didn't have time to decide whether to obey. Instinct pulled me forward, and the fabric of my wedding dress caught on the bed frame with a sound so loud it sliced through the air. I braced my hands against the cold wooden floor, my hair falling over half my face as I gasped like someone who had just survived an accident. When I lifted my head, I did not see Jake. I did not see confusion or amusement or panic. Instead, standing by the window was a tall man around 37 years old, broad-shouldered, built like he had been carved from steel and shadow. His black suit fit him with unsettling precision. The New York City skyline behind him cast half his face in light and half in darkness, a contrast sharp enough to tighten my chest. His eyes, when they locked on mine, were so cold and penetrating I felt stripped bare, like an open file he had studied many times before. The first words that tumbled from my lips came out as a stammer. I walked into the wrong room. This is my wedding night. My husband. He will be back any minute." The man tilted his head slightly, his gaze darkening in a way that made my blood run cold. "If you are waiting for your husband to save you, then I am afraid tonight is not your lucky night, Claire Bennett." The frightening part was not that he knew my name. It was how he said it. Calmly, precisely, as though he had known it long before stepping into this room, as though his being here was not an accident at all. In that moment, I understood. The hope shimmering in my ring had never belonged to me, and the betrayal had always been right in front of me, waiting for the moment I finally dared to look at it. Although the story has only begun to reveal its first hidden layers, if you find yourself drawn into the deepening spiral of Claire and Dominic's unfolding journey, I hope you will remember to subscribe to our channel, to tap like and share so that more people can join us in experiencing each breath-stealing twist as it arrives day by day. And before we move forward to the next chapter, I would truly love to know where in the world you are watching from, so please leave a comment below, write the name of your city or your country, and let me see how far Claire's path has reached across the map of this wide world. We treasure every view, every comment, and every heart traveling alongside this story. The voice returned, no longer carrying the edge of a threat, but settling into a strangely composed calm, the kind a man adopts only when he is holding a deeper anger beneath a surface of absolute control. He walked toward me slowly, with no hint of urgency. I backed away until my spine struck the edge of the bed, the long hem of my wedding dress tangling around my feet and nearly sending me to the floor. He did not reach out to help, nor did he draw a weapon as my panicked imagination had predicted. He simply stood there, taller than I was by nearly a head, looking at me as though I were a complex equation that required a careful solution. Dominic Callahan. He spoke his name with a deep American accent, yet each syllable fell into place with the clean precision of someone who had once learned Italian. Round, steady, and without a trace of distortion. If you are pretending not to know where you are, then I have to say you are not performing particularly well. My mouth fell open. I am not pretending. I thought this was Jake's room. Jake Mitchell is my husband. We were married this afternoon. I was trying to surprise him. He raised a brow, and in that small shift of his expression I sensed something was wrong. Not suspicion. Disappointment. Dominic gave a slight signal, and the door opened almost instantly. Another man entered, dressed in a black suit and wearing an earpiece like a bodyguard from a film. He handed Dominic a small metal object. Dominic turned it in his hand for a few seconds before tossing it onto the bed in front of me. It was a white keycard, printed with the room number and the hotel's logo. I recognized it instantly. It was mine, but the room number was wrong. I remembered clearly that Jake and I were staying on the 16th floor, room 612. Dominic settled into a chair, lacing his fingers together, his eyes never leaving me. The problem, Claire, is that the card you are holding is not for room 612. It is for room 615, and it was booked by Jake Mitchell, under an alias. He requested a room change just 3 hours before the ceremony. The air around me seemed to drain out of the room. I shook my head. No, that cannot be. Jake would never do that. He loves me. We met in a cafe. He knew my mother was ill. He took care of me. Dominic cut me off with a thin, steel-cold curl of his lips. Jake Mitchell is a second-rate embezzler. He stole nearly $300,000 from one of my shell companies through a chain of fabricated accounts he believed no one would uncover. But he was wrong. I found it in 48 hours. I swallowed hard, a bitter taste rising at the back of my throat. Dominic studied me closely. I assumed Jake would run, or simply disappear, but he did not. He married you, and then he switched the room so you would end up in my hands. He used you as a distraction to buy time. He knew that while I was busy figuring out who you were and whether you were a threat, he would gain a few precious hours to flee the country. I trembled. Not from the cold, but from the collision of emotions crashing through me like a violent storm. Betrayed, used, delivered. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, determined not to cry in front of this man. Dominic leaned slightly forward, his voice softening in a way that felt as if he were speaking only to me. I do not know whether you are a victim or an accomplice, but I will find out. Until then, you are not to leave this room. I will have every detail about you examined, and Jake, he will be handled in my own manner. He rose and adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. If you are innocent, Claire, then tonight will be the last night you suffer the weight of his betrayal. But if you are not, I am the last man you should attempt to deceive. Then he turned away, leaving me sitting on the cold floor, still wearing a wedding ring that sparkled under the light, even though there was no light left in me at all. The door closed behind Dominic Callahan, leaving me alone in a room so wide it felt cold to the bone, the soft golden light far too gentle to chase away the fear draining the air from my lungs. I tried to stand, but my knees weakened beneath me, my right hand clinging to the edge of the bed while my left still gripped my wedding ring as though it were a fragile anchor holding my sanity in place. I could not stay here. No matter what Dominic had said, I could not remain still, like prey waiting for a verdict. Jake might have deceived me, might have used me as a living shield, but I could not surrender my fate into the hands of a stranger, especially one whose very breath carried the weight of unspoken dominance. I staggered toward the door and tried the handle. Locked. I turned it again, still unmoving. My eyes darted around the room and landed on the bedside phone. I lifted it. No signal. My cell phone was the same. No reception at all. It had certainly been blocked. I slammed the phone onto the table, then instantly regretted the impulsive outburst. If they were watching me, I had just handed them another mark against me. I walked in circles around the room, searching for any secondary exit. There was only a bathroom and a small balcony. I pushed open the sliding glass door, and a burst of cold wind struck my face, making me freeze. The balcony was barely wide enough for one person, bordered by a glass railing, and far below stretched the night of New York, dazzling and distant, a world completely removed from the hell I was trapped in. No fire escape, no way out. Only me, in a crumpled wedding dress, and the truth that I had been pushed into the wrong move of someone's deadly game. I stepped back inside, shut the door, and pulled a blanket over myself as if it could shield me from everything closing in. I did not know how long I stayed like that before a knock sounded at the door. My heart pounded. A woman's voice came from outside, gentle yet carrying a firmness beneath the calm. "Miss Claire, I am Olivia, Mr. Callahan's assistant. I brought personal items and clothing for you." I did not respond, holding my breath, hoping she would leave if I stayed silent. But Olivia continued, her tone unchanged. "I will leave the bag outside the door. When you are ready, please dress and step out of this room. Mr. Callahan will not keep you here any longer than necessary." The moment her footsteps faded down the hallway, I sprang up and opened the door. Just as she had said, a large canvas bag sat neatly on the floor. I pulled it inside and searched through it quickly. Inside was a simple outfit: jeans, a thin sweater, a long coat, and a pair of brand new sneakers. No underwear, no cosmetics, no phone, no wallet. The sense of being controlled was sharp as a wound that did not bleed. I changed silently, unable to bring myself to look into the mirror. The bride reflected there was no longer a joyful woman. She was a ghost lost in the ruins of her wedding gown. I tied my hair back, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The hallway was long and empty, the carpet so soft it swallowed my footsteps. A man stood waiting at the far end, a radio in his hand. When he saw me, he nodded. "Please follow me." I did not ask where we were going. I no longer had choices. Walking behind him, step by step, I felt as though I were leaving behind a brief dream of happiness and walking straight into a nightmare with no visible end. Yet somewhere deep in my chest, a part of me still resisted belief. I could not accept that Jake had thrown me to the wolves. I could not accept that the man I had called my husband had delivered me like prey. And perhaps the most terrifying thing of all was that I was no longer certain whether I wanted to run from Dominic Callahan or from the part of myself that had begun to crave understanding him. The black SUV glided quietly through the empty streets of Manhattan, the gray sky casting its shadow over the towers above, as if the entire city were holding its breath alongside me. I sat in the back seat by the window, unable to look away from the passing lights streaking across the glass. The man in the passenger seat had not spoken a single word since the car pulled away, and the driver was just as silent. The stillness inside the vehicle was dense, like winter fog. I had no idea where I was being taken, only that Dominic Callahan had issued an order. And when a man like him gives an order, no one asks for clarification. The car stopped in front of a modern glass building with no sign and no nameplate. The man in the front stepped out first, opened my door, and motioned me inside. I walked into a reception hall with polished black stone floors and soft lighting, everything unnervingly quiet. Only a few minutes later, I was escorted to the top floor by a private elevator, and when the doors opened, I found myself in a vast office, minimalist but elegant, with windows stretching from floor to ceiling. Dominic stood by the glass, his back to me, hands in his pockets, the city lights tracing a faint line down his spine. He did not turn when I stepped inside. His voice came, even and cold. "Do you want to hear the truth, Claire? Or do you still believe Jake is a good man who has been misunderstood?" I did not answer. Dominic turned, walked slowly toward his desk, pulled open a drawer, and placed a thick file on the surface. "What is in there?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it steady. "Everything you need to know about the man you just married." He pushed the file toward me, then sat down, arms folded, watching me as if waiting for something to break. I opened it. The first page held a photograph of Jake, taken from a security camera, walking out of a financial office with a briefcase in hand. The timestamp was from 2 months before the wedding. I turned the pages and saw bank statements, endless transfers to accounts under unfamiliar names, all executed from a personal computer registered to the company Jake once claimed was just a temporary job. Then came printed emails, exchanges with someone using the initial G, discussing how to clean nearly $300,000 in under 3 weeks. Each line felt like a punch to the gut. I could not breathe. Dominic continued, his eyes never leaving me. He knew I was watching him. Instead of running, he came up with a plan. Take a wife, transfer assets into her name, and use her as a legal shield. You, Claire, are the tool he chose to legitimize the money he stole. You are his wife, which means marital assets, which means that if anyone investigates, all transactions lead back to a woman with no criminal record, no ties to finance or organized crime, a clean white wall to cover all his stains. I closed the file, unable to look any further. "Are you still in contact with him?" Dominic asked, his tone unchanged. I shook my head. "I have not spoken to him since I left the wedding. I do not know where his phone is. I do not even know where I am." Dominic observed me, his gaze cutting straight through my thoughts. "I have people looking for him. He is running, but not far. You do not need to worry about him. What I need to know is how you intend to respond. Will you cry, panic, or look the truth in the face and decide where you stand?" I blinked, my eyes burning, though tears still refused to fall. "I do not know. I truly do not know." Dominic rose and walked toward me. "If I want you here, protected and safe, you must understand one thing. This is no longer a matter of feelings. This is a legal war, a black and white chess match. And I, Claire, do not make a habit of losing." I looked up at him, and for the first time I understood that the danger in his words did not come from threat, but from something starkly honest. Dominic Callahan was a man who never let harm come to him without striking back. And somehow, I had just been placed inside his circle, either as the one he meant to protect or as the first piece he would sacrifice if I stepped out of line. I was taken to another apartment later that night, a place completely unfamiliar yet clearly prepared for me with deliberate care. There was no more luxury hotel, no red carpets, no wedding dress, only a 2-bedroom apartment with minimalist furniture, soft lighting, and the steady hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. Dominic did not accompany me. He left only a brief message through his guard named Marcus, telling me to rest and not leave the apartment until further notice. I did not know how long I sat on the gray sofa before the tears finally came, unstoppable now that nothing was holding them back. Every emotion I had suppressed since hiding under that bed, since being dragged into that room, since holding that file in my hands, burst all at once inside my chest. The tears fell without sound, only hot trails slipping down my cheeks, soaking the collar of my shirt, making me feel smaller and more fragile than I had ever felt in my life. I felt betrayed to the core, like a puppet pulled by strings, with not a single moment of my life belonging truly to me. Jake had not loved me, at least not in any way close to what I had imagined. Every gesture, every gentle word, every time he looked at me when I spoke about my mother, all of it had been the perfect mask for a vile plan. Worse still, I had trusted him. I had loved him. I had naively believed I was lucky to have someone like him appear in the chaos of my life, during the days when I was caring for my sick mother and working 3 shifts a week just to stay afloat. And now, looking back, I was no longer certain if anything had ever been real. I stood and walked into the small bedroom, opening the closet to find a few simple outfits already hanging inside. I changed out of the clothes I had been wearing since the beginning of the night, then slipped into the bed, curling on my side and gripping the pillow as if it were the only thing I had left to hold on to. I could not sleep, only drift in and out, jolting awake at every unfamiliar sound from the hallway or the window. I was afraid, not only of Dominic and the cold men who followed him, but of myself, because I no longer knew whom to trust. I no longer knew what waited ahead, and more frightening than anything, I realized that Dominic's presence no longer filled me only with fear. He was terrifying, yes, but he was also the only one who had told me the truth, the only one who had not needed to pretend in front of me. I hated myself for noticing the way his eyes shifted when he spoke, the low, rough authority in his voice, the way he looked at me not as though deciding how to use me, but as though weighing whether I could understand the world he lived in. I turned over, burying my face in the pillow, trying to push away the thoughts, but unable to stop the growing hollow ache inside my chest. I broke completely that night. I was no longer a joyful bride, no longer the Claire Bennett from a few hours before. I was only a woman placed in the middle of a game far too large, surrounded by liars, shadows, and secrets, with no clear path to tell me where to go next. And in that cold, sleepless darkness, the only thing I knew with certainty was that my life would never return to what it once was. Morning arrived in absolute silence. I did not wake to sunlight or an alarm, but to the steady knocking that broke through the stillness of the apartment. I sat up abruptly, my heart racing, part of me instinctively warning that I should not open the door, while the rest understood I had no real choice. When I opened it, Marcus stood there, his face as expressionless as ever. He tilted his head slightly, a wordless invitation. "Dominic is waiting for you." I did not ask where or why. I simply stepped back inside, changed clothes, tied my hair, and followed him out of the apartment. The familiar car carried me once more through streets that felt colder now under the gray December light. But this time, we did not stop at a high-rise office or a lavish hotel. Instead, the car pulled up in front of a quiet red brick townhouse tucked into a small lane near the Upper West Side, with an iron fence and branches shedding their leaves across the walkway. Dominic was seated in a glass-enclosed sunroom at the back, 2 steaming cups of coffee on the table beside a thick stack of documents. When I stepped inside, he looked up for a brief moment before lowering his gaze again. "Did you sleep at all?" I nodded lightly, though I knew my face betrayed the truth. Dominic said nothing more. He simply pushed the folder toward me. I sat down, opened it, and recognized the contents immediately. Legal documents, a petition for annulment. There were instructions for filing with the court, a letter of confirmation from Dominic's legal team, and papers verifying that the assets currently under my name were not tied to the embezzlement. Everything had already been prepared. All that was missing was my signature. Dominic leaned on the table, his fingertips tapping a slow, even rhythm against the wood. "I will take care of everything else. Jake will not be able to touch you again, nor will he be able to use you as a legal shield. But I need you to sign these so I can pull you out of this mess." I looked at him, searching for any sign that this was another trap, another method of control. But Dominic neither avoided my eyes nor pushed me. He simply waited. I exhaled, my fingers brushing across the page. So this is the end. The end of a marriage that had not even lasted a full 24 hours. Dominic took a sip of his coffee, his eyes narrowing slightly at the bitterness. The end of a mistake. Not your life. A small, incredulous laugh escaped me before fading into silence. You call it a mistake. But for me, it was a dream. Dominic sat still for a moment, then slowly set his cup down. "Claire, I do not know what you think of me, but lying is not something I do. I have done many things people cannot accept, but I do not deceive fragile women to get what I want. If you believe I am keeping you for some hidden purpose, you can walk out of here any time. But if you sign these papers, I can guarantee Jake will not harm you again, and if necessary, I will give you a new life, a new name, anything you need to escape what he dragged you into." I looked into his eyes, and for the first time I sensed something beyond danger. Certainty, resolve. Beneath it, something quietly steady, as if persuasion was not something Dominic was accustomed to, and offering choices even less so. I drew a long breath, picked up the pen, and wrote my name at the bottom of the first page. When I set the pen down, a part of me felt weightless, as though I had shed a set of chains, while another part felt hollow enough to ache. Dominic nodded once, in acknowledgement. "Good. For the next few days, you will not need to do anything. I will have someone take you back to the apartment. You may stay as long as you like. I will not interfere unless you call me." I bit my lip, my eyes lingering on my own signature. "Why are you doing this for me?" Dominic paused for a brief moment, then spoke with a low, steady clarity. "Because you are the only person in this entire game who did not lie, and I do not make a habit of abandoning someone who is honest." I returned to the apartment late that afternoon, carrying a kind of exhaustion I had never known, not the kind born of sleeplessness or strain, but the deeper fatigue that settles in when a person is forced to face decisions far too heavy in a span far too short. Marcus brought me back but did not step inside. Before leaving, he handed me a small beige envelope and said that Dominic wanted me to read it when I was alone. I did not open it right away. I set it on the table and went to the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed like a machine that had not yet understood how to restart itself. Everything in the apartment was exactly as it had been that morning, yet I was no longer the same. After sitting in silence for a while, I returned to the living room, picked up the envelope, and opened it. Inside was a sheet of paper with the address of the nursing home where my mother was receiving care, along with a single handwritten note. "You should go see her." There was no signature, but I knew the handwriting was Dominic's. I blinked, unsure why my heart suddenly beat so quickly. I had not allowed myself to think about my mother since the wedding ceremony, and I had even tried convincing myself that I would visit once everything settled. But the truth was that I had been avoiding her, avoiding the shame of letting her believe I was stepping into a happy marriage, avoiding the tenderness in her eyes when she called Jake a good man, someone she believed I could lean on. And now, standing before her with the truth of my shattered life, felt more terrifying than facing Dominic Callahan himself. I went to the nursing home the next afternoon, wrapped in a cream sweater and a scarf pulled up to my chin. My mother sat by the window, her short silver hair neatly trimmed, her thin hands resting quietly in her lap. When I walked in, she lifted her head, and a smile immediately softened the lines of her face. "Claire, you are here." Her voice was as light as breath, yet warm enough to undo me. I sat beside her and held her hand. Her skin was cold, but it was the same hand I had held through countless nights in the hospital. She studied me for a moment, as though searching my face for something. "Are you all right? Where is Jake?" I froze, then looked down at my hands, bare now where the wedding ring had once been. I think I have just woken from a mistaken dream, Mother." She did not press further. She simply nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly, though no tears formed. "Life sometimes serves a dish seasoned with salt instead of sugar. You only know the mistake when you taste it, but it is all right, as long as you can still stand again." I gripped her hand tighter, fighting the tremor in my voice. "Mother, I loved him. I truly believed he loved me, but I was only a path he used to hide what he had done, and I never saw it." She nodded slowly. "Not everyone can see the blade wrapped in silk, but I am glad you pulled your hand back before it was too late. You are not angry with me for hiding everything." She shook her head. "I am only angry at myself for not being close enough to see what was hurting you." I broke then, truly broke, the way a person does when they stop trying to be strong. I leaned into her shoulder and let myself cry without shame, letting the feeling of belonging, however brief, fill the hollow space inside me. By the time I left the nursing home, darkness had settled over the sky. I stood in the courtyard for a while, breathing deeply, feeling for the first time in days as though a weight had finally been lifted from my chest. Dominic had been right. I needed to see my mother, not for advice, but to remember that I was still myself, still rooted, still loved unconditionally by at least one person in this world, and with that alone, I knew I was not defeated. I was only beginning again. My new apartment sat on the 10th floor of a modern building in southern Manhattan, complete with a private elevator, a 4-layer security reception, and wide glass windows overlooking the Hudson River. Dominic did not take me there himself. He left only a slip of paper with the address, and told Marcus to drive me. He offered no explanation, no phone call, no reassurance. I could not tell whether this was his way of caring or his way of keeping his distance, but I was too tired to decipher it any further. The apartment was 3 times larger than any place I had ever lived, its white walls and minimalist furnishings so spotless and new that I hesitated to touch anything. On the kitchen counter sat a bouquet of white chrysanthemums in a simple glass vase, without a card, though I knew exactly who had placed them there. I stood in the center of the living room with my suitcase by my feet, watching the last light of the day filter through the thin curtains, bathing the room in a warm but unfamiliar shade of amber. Everything was too quiet. No footsteps, no kettle whistling, no phone ringing, no messages arriving. Only me, and the emptiness seeping into the corners like a slow, creeping shadow. I walked into the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. Everything had already been arranged. Sleepwear, coats, dresses, several pairs of new shoes, all in my size as though someone had measured me without ever asking. Dominic had not only given me a new place to stay, he had built the beginning of a new life without asking whether I was ready for it. I knew I should feel grateful, yet it also felt like losing another small piece of control. I wandered through the apartment, opening doors, touching surfaces, running my fingers along table edges and doorknobs, as though trying to will the place into becoming familiar. But nothing in these walls belonged to me. No photographs, no remnants of memories, no scents I recognized. Only a beautiful, immaculate beginning that felt utterly hollow. I sat in the armchair by the window and watched the city lights rise, feeling the weight of a strange contradiction settle in my chest. I was free, protected, cut loose from a past built on lies, and yet I had never felt lonelier. No Jake, no mother beside me each day, no old job, no familiar cafe, no noise from the streets I grew up on. I had been separated from everything, placed inside a space too beautiful and too safe, yet offering nothing for me to hold on to. I heated a can of soup and ate it alone at the kitchen counter, counting the ticking seconds of the wall clock. No phone calls came, no messages from anyone. Dominic had been right. I was protected. But he had not mentioned that such protection would arrive wrapped in a silence so stark it made me want to scream. I turned on the television just to hear another human voice echo through the rooms, though I was not really watching. The emptiness made me question who I was in this story. A discarded victim, a rescued pawn, a woman suspended between 2 worlds that neither wanted her. I curled up on the corner of the sofa with a pillow in my arms, watching the city lights flicker outside, wondering whether Dominic was thinking about me at all. Whether he knew that somewhere within this city of crowded streets and glowing towers, there was a woman sitting in the apartment he had prepared for her, feeling more hollow than ever. I did not know, and the truth was, I no longer dared to hope. I was sitting dazed by the window, the city lights blurring through eyes that burned with fatigue, when the doorbell rang. The unexpected sound made my heart jolt. I was not expecting anyone, and I could not imagine anyone other than Marcus being allowed up to this floor. I stood and walked to the door, glanced through the peephole, and felt my heartbeat lurch again when I saw Dominic standing outside. He wore a black leather jacket, and for the first time his face did not carry its usual tension but instead held a faint, very human weariness. I opened the door, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "What are you doing here?" Dominic looked at me, his gaze softer than it had ever been. "I guessed you had not eaten dinner." I did not answer, because the truth was that I had eaten, though I had barely been able to swallow anything. Dominic did not wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, carrying a paper bag from an Italian restaurant downtown, the same one I had once heard Jake mention, and he closed the door quietly behind him. He had not brought Marcus, nor anyone else. He had come alone. I watched as he set the bag on the kitchen counter, unpacked 2 boxes of pasta, a box of salad, and a bottle of wine. He spoke as he placed the food onto plates, moving with the ease of someone performing a familiar routine. I can stay quiet if you prefer. I just thought, eating alone is not good for the mind. I sat across from him, caught off guard by this version of Dominic, so different from the man I had come to fear. He did not talk about Jake, nor lawyers, nor any plans. We simply ate. The silence stretched at first, but slowly, small and simple words began to fill the space. Dominic asked if I wanted more wine, and I nodded. I asked where he usually ate dinner, and he shrugged, saying most nights it was at the office, sometimes in the car. When I frowned, Dominic let out a soft, self-deprecating laugh. Not an ideal life, but I chose it. And once you choose something, you do not complain. I watched him for a moment longer, and for the first time I saw real exhaustion settle in the lines of his face, a weariness deeper than anything his cold composure usually revealed. How old are you? Dominic looked up, as if surprised by the question. 37. Why? I lifted a shoulder. I guessed you were younger. He smiled, a brief flicker of expression like a passing breeze. No one ever guesses right. I am older than the life I have lived. His words settled between us like a quiet truth that needed no explanation. After dinner, he did not rush to leave. Dominic helped me wash the dishes, and there was a moment, fleeting but unmistakable, when his hand brushed mine beneath the running water, and I nearly flinched, not out of fear, but because of the unexpected calm that radiated from that small point of contact. When we finished, Dominic stood in the living room and glanced around. This apartment is safe, but if you feel uncomfortable, I can move you somewhere else. I shook my head. It is not the place that makes me uneasy. It is me. Dominic nodded slightly, as if he understood too well. He stepped toward the door, placed his hand on the knob, then paused and turned back to me. Claire, I do not know what is going to happen next, but I want you to know that I did not come here tonight because of Jake, or because of any plan or strategy. I just did not want you to eat dinner alone. He left after that, without waiting for a response, leaving me standing in the warm glow of the apartment lights, still holding a half-finished glass of wine. For the first time since my marriage collapsed, I felt something shift inside my chest, not because of a man promising to love me forever, but because of someone who simply chose to come and sit with me on a quiet night. 3 days after the night Dominic unexpectedly appeared with dinner and a quiet, strangely comforting silence, I received his first message since then, just a single line. If you are not busy, I would like to take you to lunch. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying that I would go, not out of curiosity, but because a part of me had been waiting for this, though I refused to admit it even to myself. He arrived in a black convertible, simple yet refined. There was no Marcus, no escort, no entourage. We drove toward the outskirts of the city, to a small lakeside restaurant tucked beneath a canopy of trees, where the noon light shimmered across the water like scattered gold. Dominic pulled out my chair, ordered for both of us without looking at the menu, then sat across from me, saying nothing for a long while. He wore a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and on his left wrist was a faint scar I had never noticed before. After several minutes of quiet, Dominic began to speak, not in his usual dry, cold tone, but slowly, pausing now and then as if choosing words that would not reveal more than he intended. I grew up in the Bronx. My mother died when I was 9. My father collected protection money in the neighborhood. Not mafia like in the movies, just an old, violent underworld system. I hated it, but there was no way out. When I was 16, he was shot in front of our house for collecting from the wrong man. Dominic paused, his gaze drifting toward the lake. After that, an uncle took me in, and he was the one who brought me into the world I live in now. I learned law, finance, learned how to use my mind instead of my fists, but the price was that I was never allowed to be weak, never allowed to trust anyone. Everyone I ever cared about either left me or was taken from me. I did not respond immediately. I let his words settle, each one slow and heavy. Dominic continued, his voice softer. When I was 28, I fell in love with a woman. Her name was Elise. She was a freelance photographer with a smile that could strip the darkness out of anything. I thought I could leave it all behind because of her. We planned to move to California, but a few weeks before we left, she died in a car crash. The police said it was an accident, but I knew it was a warning. If I walked away, I would lose everything. Dominic took a small piece of paper from his wallet and placed it on the table. It was an old, slightly faded photograph of a brown-haired woman smiling in the sunlight. Elise, She was the only thing that ever made me think I could be a normal man. I handed the picture back without speaking. Dominic looked at me, and his eyes no longer held the familiar control but something almost vulnerable. I am not telling you this for pity. I just think you deserve to know who you are sitting beside. Not a hero. Not a good man. But not entirely a monster either. I nodded slightly, my chest tightening with a mixture of emotions I could not name. Dominic was not perfect, and he did not pretend to be. Yet it was this very imperfection that made him more real than anyone I had known in a long time. I thought of my own past, of my mother, of Jake, of the years I had spent trying so hard to do everything right, only to be shattered anyway. And now here I was, sitting across from a man whose entire life was built on layers of armor, yet he was choosing to open a small part of himself for me to see. When lunch ended, Dominic drove me home. Before I stepped out of the car, he said quietly, "Thank you for listening to me." Just that one sentence, simple and unadorned, tightened something inside my heart. I turned to him and replied softly, "Thank you for telling me." And when the door closed behind me, I knew something had shifted, not in him, but in me. I no longer saw Dominic Callahan only as a man of power, but as someone who had lost everything once and still chose to remain standing to protect whatever remained. And I began to wonder whether I too was slowly choosing to stay near someone like him. It was a quiet Friday morning with a light rain falling when I decided to walk to the small cafe a few blocks from the apartment, a place I had visited once and remembered for its stillness. I wore a thin raincoat, a cap, and sunglasses, trying to blend into the city even though, deep down, I knew I was only trying to feel normal in a life that no longer had anything normal left in it. The cafe was nearly empty, just a few people working on their laptops or reading quietly. I ordered a cappuccino and chose a corner table by the window. Everything was calm until I felt someone's gaze fixed on me. At first I told myself it was my imagination, but when I looked up, I saw a man sitting 2 tables away, holding a cup of coffee while his eyes never left me. He was not old, perhaps in his early 40s, wearing a dark brown jacket, clean-shaven, with a faint scar on his left cheek. His stare was not casual or curious. It was cold, intentional. I forced myself to stay calm and turned away, though my heart was pounding hard against my ribs. "You are overreacting," I told myself. "Maybe he simply thinks he recognizes you." But the unease did not fade. I stood to leave, only to see him put his cup down and rise as well. Not imagination. He was following me. I walked quickly out of the cafe without looking back. The rain had stopped, but I kept my cap pulled low, heading in the opposite direction from the apartment. I did not want him to know where I lived. My pulse hammered in my throat as I slipped into a nearby convenience store, pretending to browse the shelves. When I glanced out through the glass door, he was still there, leaning against a street lamp across the road, his eyes locked on the store. My hands shook so badly I entered the wrong passcode twice before finally managing to call Marcus. I barely had time to say I was being followed before he answered firmly, telling me not to move. Less than 5 minutes later, a black car pulled up and Marcus stepped out, striding toward me. The moment I opened the door to leave the store, the man was gone. All I caught was the outline of his back disappearing behind a row of parked cars. Marcus took my arm and guided me into the car without a word until the doors were closed. Someone leaked information. It is not the press. Dominic took care of that. I clenched my hands, unable to tell whether it was fear or anger pulsing through me. Jake. Marcus shook his head. If it were Jake, he would not show himself. He would send someone else. This one is not an ordinary errand boy. Dominic will want to hear about this. I nodded, silent. As the car cut through the misty rain, I stared out the window, feeling the fragile sense of safety I had begun to rebuild shatter like glass hitting stone. No matter where I went or what I did, there was still a world out there hunting me, as if I were a leftover chess piece someone wanted erased from the board. And for the first time, I understood why Dominic controlled everything with such ruthless precision. Because if he did not, men like the one with the cold stare would always be waiting for the moment a person lowered their guard. I did not want to believe I had become a target, but clearly the past I thought I had left behind was still trailing after me, and it would not stop until either it disappeared, or I did. I knew Dominic would uncover the identity of the stranger within hours, but I did not expect Jake to surface as quickly as he did. Less than 24 hours after the incident, Marcus received orders from Dominic to bring me to his private office on the 36th floor of a tower in Midtown. There was no explanation, but my intuition told me everything had shifted. When the door opened, Dominic stood with his back to the vast window, his tall, severe frame outlined by the fading afternoon light. But what froze me in place was the man sitting in the chair before the desk. Jake. He looked nothing like the polished, steady man from the wedding day. He was thinner, his eyes bloodshot, and the smirk on his lips carried a bitter, mocking edge. Dominic gave a slight nod, asking me to sit, but I could not look away from Jake. I clenched my hands, trying to steady my voice. "What are you doing here?" Jake let out a laugh that echoed strangely through the quiet room. "I think you know the answer. Dominic wants you to hear it from me." Dominic did not deny it. He simply pushed a folder toward me. Inside were notes, images, internal emails, undeniable proof that Jake had sold confidential information from the organization to an international money laundering ring for profit. My hands shook as I turned each page, every line striking like a blow against what little remained of my trust. Jake sat back casually, as if he had nothing to be ashamed of. Dominic spoke calmly but with iron in his voice. "He wants you to know the truth. Not for me. For you to stop blaming yourself." Jake tilted his head, his smile curling into something poisonous. "Did you really think I loved you, Claire? You were a tool. I needed someone clean, someone easy to guide, easy to mold, and the way you worshipped me made it all too easy. You let me hide every transaction behind a marriage license. Who would ever believe a man like me would marry a broke healthcare worker, right?" I could not help it. My body moved before my mind did. I was on my feet, tears rising not from heartbreak anymore, but from sheer fury. So it was all staged. Every late-night call when I finished my shift, every visit to see my mother, all of it was a lie. Jake did not flinch. His voice dropped, colder than anything I had ever heard from him. Every part of it was calculated. "You think I cared about your mother's tragic stories? I tolerated them just long enough to get the signature, the marriage, the escape route if I got caught." But Dominic cut him off, his voice slicing through Jake's venom. "Enough. He is here to sign the final documents before the hearing, and so you can look him in the eye with no unanswered questions left to poison you." Jake snorted, then turned toward me again, his gaze sharp, cruel. "But do you want to know the most amusing part, Claire? You are falling for Dominic, aren't you? The way you look at him is exactly the way you looked at me. Pathetic. You always choose the wrong man." Dominic moved so fast the room seemed to shift with him. With one hand he grabbed Jake by the collar and yanked him back from the chair. "No one insults her in this room." Jake only laughed harder, wild and unhinged. Heat rushed to my face, but what filled me was not pain anymore, it was release. I looked straight into Jake's eyes, and for the first time my voice did not tremble. "You can lie to me, betray me, use me, but you will never again have the power to hurt me. You have lost everything, and I have lost every illusion I ever had about you." Dominic released him, letting Jake stumble as Marcus stepped forward to escort him out. The door closed behind him, leaving the room steeped in silence except for the thud of my own heartbeat. Fast, but steady. Dominic walked toward me and placed a hand gently on my shoulder, saying nothing. He did not need to. Because I understood. Every wound eventually closes if you have the courage to face the one who caused it and say you intend to go on living. And in that moment, I knew I no longer feared Jake, nor the past he represented. I had only myself now, and the road ahead opening slowly, not because of anyone else, but because I finally believed I deserved my own freedom and peace after everything. I did not think facing Jake would affect me as deeply as it did, yet for hours afterward I could not sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling in the dark, feeling as though the venom he had poured into my ears was still lingering in the room. I did not cry, but my body felt rigid, and my mind spun with questions that offered no answers. Part of me felt lighter now that the truth had finally been confronted, but another part was unsettled, unsure whom I was supposed to trust anymore. The next morning, Dominic arrived without warning. He brought coffee and a bag of pastries from the little bakery I had mentioned only once during dinner. I was surprised he remembered, but I did not manage to thank him before he noticed something was wrong. He asked if I wanted to take a walk. I nodded. We walked slowly through a nearby park, saying nothing for the first stretch of the path. When we reached a bench beneath a wide old tree, Dominic stopped and turned toward me, his expression more serious than usual. "Claire, I know yesterday was not easy, but I need you to trust me. Jake cannot hurt you anymore. Everything has been handled." I nodded faintly but did not respond. Dominic watched me for a moment, then continued. "If something is weighing on you, I hope you will tell me. I do not want to guess." His words made me pause. I turned to him, my voice catching even as I tried to keep it steady. "Then you want to hear the truth. The truth is, I feel like I am still part of some plan of yours, Like every time I step out of one shadow, I am dragged into another that I have no control over. Dominic stiffened. I had never imagined he would be angry, yet his face tightened. You think I am manipulating you? I did not say that. I have been betrayed too many times, by Jake, by people I trusted, and now, even though my mind knows you are different, my feelings will not listen. Dominic fell silent, his gaze turning colder. I am not Jake. I do not use someone's feelings to hide my mistakes. If I care about you, that is real. If I protect you, it is because I choose to, not because I gain anything from it. I clasped my hands tightly, my chest aching because I knew I had stepped too far, yet I could not apologize, not yet. I needed to speak my fear aloud, even if it wounded someone else. Dominic rose, walked a few steps away, then turned back, his eyes still cool, but his voice quieter. Trust does not come from promises. It comes from choosing to stay. Even when staying feels uncertain, I have chosen to stay. What about you? I could not answer. He looked at me for a few more seconds, then turned and walked away, leaving me sitting alone in the wind-filled park. I did not know whether I was right or wrong. I only knew that for the first time since meeting Dominic, I felt a true distance between us, not because he had hidden something, but because I had drawn a boundary of my own. I had let old wounds shape my reaction to the man standing in front of me, and that choice might cost me the one thing in my life that was beginning to feel real again. Something like love, fragile and flawed, but honest. 2 days after the tense conversation in the park, Dominic still had not reached out. No message, no call, no sign of him. I did not contact him either. Part of me still felt wounded by the cold look in his eyes that day, and another part was tangled in a quiet longing I did not know how to name. It was not the same ache I once felt when missing Jake, but a strange emptiness, as if without Dominic, nothing in this new life carried meaning. On the 3rd day, I found a handwritten note slipped beneath my door. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp and angular. Inside was a single line. If you still want an explanation, meet me on the rooftop at 8 tonight. I read it again and again, then stood in silence for what felt like hours, unable to decide whether I should go. But as the hour approached, I found myself putting on a coat and stepping out the door, my heart pounding as though I were walking toward a threshold that might change everything. The rooftop was quiet, washed in gentle yellow light with the wind sweeping between the buildings. Dominic stood there with his back to me, hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched as if he carried the weight of the sky. I approached without speaking. He turned when I was only a few steps away, his eyes no longer sharp but filled with hesitation. I thought you would not come. I almost said I had thought the same, but I stayed silent. Dominic exhaled and stepped closer, his voice low, almost like a confession. I am not good at opening up, Claire. My life was built from layers of steel. And sometimes I forget that if you want someone to stay, you cannot always be on guard. His honesty struck something deep in me. He lifted his gaze, meeting mine fully. I thought that if you walked away, I would let you. But these past 2 days I realized I could not. I want to say I am sorry for making you feel like you were part of some plan, but more than an apology, I want to promise you this. He stepped closer, close enough that I could hear his breath blending with the quick rhythm of my own heart. Whatever happens, whatever my past may hold, I will never use you as a tool, not in this war, not in anything. I had never heard anyone make a promise like that, spoken with such calm certainty, each word chosen with care, stripped of embellishment, yet carrying the weight of a heart that understood the value of truth. Dominic waited for my reaction, but I did not answer with words. Instead, I rose on my toes and placed my hand against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat beneath his shirt. He froze for a moment, then wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me closer, his breath uneven as though restraining himself from something too sudden. And then he leaned down and kissed me. It was not rushed, not burning, but slow, deep, and sure, as if he were sealing a promise not with language but with breath and closeness and everything he had never dared to offer before. When he finally let me go, the wind was still brushing through my hair, and the city below us was still alive with its endless noise. But in that moment, all of it seemed far away. There was only Dominic and me, standing in a space that felt both quiet and fierce, like the beginning of something unnamed, yet undeniable, growing between two people who had once been broken. I did not know what the future would bring. I only knew that this first kiss was not an ending, but a beginning. A promise made without words, carried by the unmistakable feeling of a heart learning how to trust again. We did not call it dating, at least neither of us dared say the word aloud. But after that first kiss on the rooftop, something between Dominic and me began to shift. The long, uncertain silences disappeared, replaced by messages from him each morning, sometimes only asking if I had slept well, sometimes sending me a picture of his breakfast with a note so understated it became endearing, such as "the eggs are a little overdone." I never imagined a man like Dominic could make me laugh over a burnt piece of toast, yet somehow he did. On a quiet Saturday evening, he picked me up in his old sports car, not the sleek black vehicles with drivers and security, just something worn and familiar. He wore jeans and a dark t-shirt, his hair less polished than usual, and he smiled when he saw my surprise. "I thought we should do something ordinary," he said. "Ordinary the way people do when they are not living between threats and cold decisions." He took me to a vintage movie house tucked between old brick buildings, the kind that showed black and white classics and sold popcorn scooped by hand instead of in plastic tubs. We chose the last row where no one paid attention to anyone else, and for the first time I saw Dominic truly relax. During the film, he leaned toward me now and then, not to warn or explain anything, but to whisper some silly observation that made me laugh softly in the dark. His hand brushed mine, not insistently, not with expectation, just a warm, steady presence. After the movie, we walked along a quiet street as he told me about the day he skipped martial arts class as a boy to watch an action film with friends, only to be caught by his uncle the moment he stepped outside the theater. I laughed until my sides ached as he described how his uncle tugged him by the ear in front of everyone, and Dominic looked at me as though he had stumbled upon something precious he had not dared hope for. I never thought I would tell someone about my childhood and feel a sense of ease instead of heaviness. When I looked up at him, I did not speak, but I held his hand a little tighter. He walked me back to my apartment, but this time he did not leave right away. We cooked a simple dinner together, pasta and salad, and Dominic was so clumsy he dropped a knife into the sink, sending water splashing across my shirt. He apologized in a panic, and we both burst into laughter when I flicked a spoonful of tomato sauce at him in retaliation. As I turned away to clean my shirt, he stepped behind me, set his hands gently on my shoulders, and whispered, "Thank you for letting me into this part of your life." He did not stay the night, but before he left, he kissed my forehead, slow and tender, as though it were the only way he knew how to hold the moment without breaking it. After the door closed behind him, I sat on the sofa holding a pillow that still carried his faint cologne, a peace settling inside me that felt almost unfamiliar. Dominic was no longer the distant man in a black suit, untouched by emotion. He was someone who could forget a falling knife because he was laughing too hard, someone who once had his ear pulled in public, someone who knew how to listen, how to be silent at the right time, and how to let himself admit that strength was not the only thing that mattered. I once believed I would never trust another man after what Jake had done, but Dominic was quietly proving me wrong. Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with quiet evenings, shared laughter in a small kitchen, and the simple act of holding my hand in a crowd without hiding it. And I realized that love does not need to be loud to be profound. It only needs to be real enough that someone chooses to stay. That evening the rain fell softly, each drop, like a thin silver thread touching the stone pavement and glimmering beneath the warm golden lights of the old street. Dominic brought me to a small Italian restaurant tucked quietly inside an alley, where gentle jazz drifted from an old speaker resting on a wooden shelf. The room was so warm, so intimate, that for a moment I forgot how dangerous and chaotic the world outside had once felt. We sat at a table by the window, where we could watch the passers-by, and Dominic rested his hand lightly on mine, an unthinking gesture that nonetheless sent my heart stumbling in its rhythm. He ordered red wine, then sat silent for a long moment, his eyes on me with a heaviness that made me feel as though he was weighing something enormous. "Claire, there is something I need to tell you," he said, "and if after hearing it you feel I am no longer myself, I will understand." I looked at him, a strange tightness gathering in my chest. Dominic had never hesitated before anything, yet here he was, choosing each breath as if the wrong word might break whatever fragile space existed between us. "I once believed I did not need to love anyone again," he said. "I thought that if I lived by my own rules, controlled everything, nothing could hurt me the way loss once did. But then you came, carrying a different kind of quiet, one that asked for nothing, demanded nothing, simply stayed. You made this world feel less empty to me." He paused, his fingers tightening around mine as if to steady himself. "I love you, Claire. Not the kind of love written in books, but the love of a man who has lost everything and has now found something worth protecting. A love that frightens me, yet makes me want to be better, even if only for you. For a moment my heart seemed to stop, not out of shock, but because his words were so honest I could not help but believe them. I never imagined I would hear the word love from a man like him, a man who had once buried his heart behind walls built of grief and steel. I did not need time to think or weigh my answer. I simply smiled softly, placed my other hand over his, and said, "I love you too, Dominic. I love the way you face the truth even when it cuts. I love your quiet, your unspoken kindness, and the sorrow in your eyes you think no one notices." Dominic held my gaze for a long moment before a small, rare smile appeared, the kind of smile that made my eyes sting with happiness. He did not say anything more. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed me in the glow of candlelight, while the rain whispered against the glass. It was not a fiery kiss from the movies, but a quiet vow that from this moment on, neither of us would face the road ahead alone. And in that moment, I understood that I was not only loved, but chosen, and that among all the things Dominic could control, he chose instead to let go just enough to hold me with the whole of his heart. 1 week after the night Dominic told me he loved me, I woke in an apartment washed with sunlight and felt a peace I had once believed I would never reclaim. But that peace did not last. That morning, Dominic received a phone call that drained every hint of warmth from his face. He said nothing at first, only kissed my forehead before leaving, the half-finished breakfast still on the table behind him. By late afternoon, Marcus arrived to take me to him, offering no explanation beyond "Dominic wants you present." The car drove us to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where rusted beams creaked in the wind and the smell of damp earth and iron settled heavy in the air. When I stepped inside, Dominic was standing there, his back straight, arms folded, his face stripped of expression. In front of him sat Jake, hands tied, slumped in a chair with dried blood staining his shirt. I stumbled back before instinct gave way to reason, and Dominic stepped beside me, squeezing my hand gently, his eyes no longer angry but cold in a way that felt absolute. "He betrayed you, and he betrayed the organization," Dominic said, his voice flat, as though all emotion had long been sealed away. "He sold information to our rivals, staged a marriage to hide from investigators, and most recently attempted to flee the country with a forged passport." Jake lifted his head, eyes bloodshot, half deranged and half defiant. "So what now? Dominic, kill me to shut me up." Dominic did not answer right away. He stared at him for a long moment, then turned to me. "I did not want you to see this, but I no longer want to hide anything from you. Things have gone too far to protect with silence." I swallowed hard, looking at Jake not as the man I once loved, but as a ghost of my past, ragged and shameless. Dominic continued, his voice steady and low. "I do not kill the innocent, and he, unfortunately, is not innocent. But I will not let him vanish too quickly. That would be too kind." Dominic nodded to Marcus, who opened a small suitcase on the old metal table. Inside were the forged passport, cash, and a tracking phone. Dominic stepped close to Jake, leaned down, and murmured, "I am letting you live, but every step you take, I will know. You will not hide behind any mask or name again. You will not have access to anyone you once used, and if you come back, even once, I will not need violence. I will use the law, the evidence you left behind, and send you somewhere you can never walk out of." Jake screamed and twisted, but no one reacted. Dominic turned away as if Jake no longer existed in his world. By the time we stepped out of the warehouse, night had fallen. Dominic drove me home without speaking, but his hand held mine tighter than it ever had. I knew he did not regret his decision. He had chosen not to kill Jake, and yet not to forgive him either. He chose a harder path, one marked by restraint and pain, but one that remained loyal to the code that separated him from the world he had once lived in. I leaned my head on his shoulder as the city blurred past the windows, feeling a small measure of release, though old wounds do not heal in a single night. I no longer saw Jake in my dreams, no longer feared footsteps behind me or strange eyes on the street. Dominic had given me more than love. He had given me justice, delivered in a form I could accept without surrendering myself to darkness again. And I knew then that even though our pasts were carved with scars, this present made of hurt and choice and courage was the beginning of something truly worth hoping for. The graduation ceremony unfolded on a radiant early summer day, sunlight filtering through the leaves on campus and turning everything into something shimmering and full of life. I stood among hundreds of other students, wearing a deep blue gown, the graduation cap tilted slightly over my soft curls, my hand clutching the nursing degree I had dreamed of through years of exhaustion and moments when I almost gave up. In the noisy crowd of laughter and celebration, I recognized Dominic instantly. He stood at the far end of the courtyard, sleeves rolled up on his white shirt, no tie, looking slightly out of place among the polished parents. Yet his eyes were fixed on me, and never wavered for even a heartbeat. When the ceremony ended, I walked to him with an armful of flowers from friends. Dominic looked at me, a smile rising gently in his eyes before he said softly, "You did it." I had no time to respond before he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. I froze as he knelt right there in the stone walkway, surrounded by hundreds of people passing by, unbothered by their presence, unbothered by being seen. Dominic was not a man who showed emotion easily, much less before a crowd. Yet in that moment he did something I never imagined he would, not to impress me, but because he meant every word he was about to say. "Claire, I once believed this day would never come, that my life was not built for something simple and gentle like a proposal. But you made me want something different, made me believe that after everything, I still deserve a home. I am not perfect, and there will be days you dislike me for my control, my silences, or the damage I sometimes cannot hide. But if you give me the chance, I will spend the rest of my life learning how to love you the right way." His proposal did not glitter with poetic promises or visions of a flawless life. It was something more honest, so earnest it tightened my chest. I did not cry, but my heart trembled in a way that felt like every old wound was being soothed at once. I nodded, just slightly, but enough for Dominic to smile and slip the ring onto my finger. The same hand that once felt cold and distant now trembled faintly with emotion. People around us clapped and whistled, but I heard nothing except my heartbeat and the soft sound of his breath near mine. That evening we did not throw a lavish party. Dominic cooked a simple dinner at home, grilled meat and red wine, then played the jazz records he knew I loved. We sat on the sofa, hand in hand, looking out at the city lights flickering like 1,000 unformed dreams. I leaned my head on his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you, not just for the ring or the promise, but for choosing me after everything." Dominic squeezed my hand gently and murmured, "Not after everything, but because of everything." And I knew then that our journey was not ending here. It was only beginning, no longer a flight from danger, but the start of a life where I could be myself, could be loved, and could continue dreaming the dreams I once abandoned with the man who stepped out of the shadows and chose to walk with me into the light. We were married on a gentle autumn afternoon, beneath a clear sky and a soft breeze moving through the fading golden leaves. There was no grand church, no crowd of guests, no elaborate rituals, only a small garden behind an old wooden house on the outskirts of the city, a place Dominic had bought years ago but never lived in for more than a few days at a time. Our guests were only my small family, a few close friends, and Marcus, who stood beside Dominic like the loyal shadow he had always been. I wore a simple white dress sewn by a friend of my mother, nothing extravagant, but fitting so perfectly it felt as though it had been made for no one but me. Dominic, in a charcoal gray suit without a tie, looked as steady and composed as ever, yet there was something softer, deeper, and brighter in his eyes that day, something I had never seen so clearly before. When I walked toward him along the path scattered with white petals, my heartbeat slowed, as if trying to memorize every passing second. No speeches were read, no priest or minister stood between us. It was just the two of us beneath a trellis of white roses, speaking vows in voices that trembled yet carried an undeniable truth. Dominic looked at me without looking away, his voice roughened slightly as he began. "I will not promise to always be right, nor to always be strong. I am a man with a past, with scars no one can erase and sleepless nights no one ever sees, but I promise you will never walk through them alone. I promise to listen, even when you do not speak, to wait, even when you need time, and to love you, not perfectly, but in the only way I know how." I let out a small laugh through my tears, not because his words were amusing, but because they were so real that I needed nothing else, not ceremonies, not grandeur, only the presence of the man standing before me. I answered with a voice caught in my throat, but with a heart suddenly weightless, as if relieved of everything it had carried. "I will not promise to always understand you, but I promise not to turn away when you need me. I will not promise never to hurt you, but I promise to learn how to love you every day, even on the days you drive me mad. And if life becomes chaotic, I will not run. I will stay, because I believe in us." Marcus handed us the rings, simple silver bands with our names engraved inside. When Dominic slipped the ring onto my finger, his hand was cool at first, then warm as he gently tightened his hold. Our first kiss as husband and wife was not long or fiery, but it was enough to make me feel that every choice, every turn, every mistake, and every wound had led me to this place, to him. When we turned back toward our families, they applauded with an overflowing joy. My mother wiped her tears. Marcus gave a subtle nod, his expression showing a rare flicker of emotion. No one said much, and no one needed to, because we all understood that love did not require a lavish wedding or flowery vows. It only required two people brave enough to say that no matter how the world changes, we will choose each other, we will stay beside each other, and we will keep learning how to love each other, day after day, until there are no more days left to live. 3 years after our wedding, Dominic and I lived in a small house on the edge of the city, a place with a white picket fence, a lavender garden by the porch, and birdsong drifting into our mornings like a gentle blessing. Life was not always peaceful. Dominic still had to go out to handle work, sometimes returning with exhaustion etched deep into his face, and I, after graduating and becoming a nurse at a community clinic, often came home bone-tired from long night shifts. But the greatest difference was that we always found our way back to each other, even on the days when words felt scarce, because our presence alone was enough to quiet whatever storms lingered inside us. Dominic spent every Sunday morning tending the garden now, something he once thought was a waste of time. Yet he cared for each rose bush and patch of grass, with the patience of a man learning to slow his life down. I learned to cook the dishes he loved, no longer clumsy the way I had once been, and each of our dinners became a small ritual with no phones, no emails, only the quiet sharing of our day and laughter that felt soft and warm. We did not need to say "I love you" every day, because love lived in the way Dominic held my hand when we walked down the street, or the way he always left a coat by the door knowing I often forgot mine, and I no longer needed him to make promises, because his presence in the smallest moments was already the clearest promise he could make. Looking back, I never imagined I would come this far. A woman who once hid beneath a hotel bed on her wedding night, betrayed by the man she trusted most, was now living a simple but full life with the man whose cold eyes once frightened her. Dominic, who had carried darkness with every step, had become the one who wiped my tears when I felt overwhelmed, the one who told me of childhood dreams he had abandoned long ago. Life was not perfect, and neither was love, but what kept us standing was not fairy tale magic. It was choosing each other every day, learning forgiveness, learning to listen, and accepting the unfinished parts of who we were. Our story may not be one everyone experiences, but I believe that deep within us all, there are wounds, doubts, and moments when giving up seems easier. What matters is whether, when you meet someone who makes every past hurt feel less meaningless, you dare to open your heart and keep walking forward. And you, after hearing this story, how do you feel? Have you ever lived through a love as difficult as Claire once did? Do you believe that after everything, you still deserve love and happiness? Share your feelings in the comments below. We would be grateful to read your honest thoughts. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. We have many more heartfelt, inspiring stories to bring you in the days ahead. Thank you for listening until the very end. Wishing you good health, a peaceful life, and joy in every moment. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.